I now call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 100 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans. This meeting, of course, has taken place in a hybrid format pursuant to standing orders. Before we proceed, I would like to make a few comments for the benefit of witnesses and members. Please wait until I recognise you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either Floor, English or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. Please address all comments through the chair. And just a quick reminder, before we proceed, I simply want to tell members or witnesses to be careful when handling the earpieces, especially when your microphone or your neighbour's microphone is turned on. Earpieces placed too close to a microphone are one of the most common causes of sound feedback, which is extremely harmful to interpreters and causes serious injury. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and a motion adopted on February 15th, 2024, the committee is commencing its study of scales used by the Department of Fisheries and Oceans to set redfish quotas. Welcome everyone. Today we have the Department of Fisheries and Oceans with us. Of course, back again, a number of them, and Adam Burns, Assistant Deputy Minister, Programme Sector, Bernard Vigneault, Director General, Ecosystem Science Directorate, Todd Williams, Senior Director, Fisheries Resource Management Operations, and by video conference we have Sylvain Vezinet, Regional Director General, Quebec Region, and Doug Wenzel, Regional Director General, Gulf Region. Thank you for taking time to appear today. You have opening statement, 5 minutes or less, please. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for having us today to talk about the Minister's recent decisions on Unit 1 redfish and the shrimp fishery in the estuary and Gulf St. Lawrence. Je suis Adam Burns, sous-ministre adjoint du secteur des programmes responsable.
My name is Adam Burns, Assistant Deputy Minister of the Programme Sector responsible for Fisheries and Harbour Management at Fisheries and Oceans Canada.
Is the traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe. The peoples of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation have lived on this territory for millennia, and their culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. L'augmentation récente de la biomasse du sébaste et le passage.
The recent increase in redfish biomass and the move to a commercial fishery is a good news story, but is not without challenges. The reopening of the fishery offers a unique opportunity to do things differently, given the socio-economic changes since the moratorium, particularly with respect to advancing Indigenous reconciliation.
Consultations in 2021 and 2022 with Indigenous groups and a range of stakeholders from Eastern Canada. Participants were offered several opportunities to provide views on access and allocation and the principles that they believed were important for the Minister to consider in her decision. Dans les politiques de pêche et océan Canada, il n'existe pas de mécanisme.
There is no defined mechanism in DFO policies to rank or weigh the various criteria in access and allocation decisions. However, with the adoption of the amended Fisheries Act, amended in 2019, the considerations for deciding on an access and allocation key, among others, are contained directly in legislation.
The Minister's decision delivers on the commitment to Indigenous reconciliation. It respects and maintains the inshore and midshore mobile fleet's historical access, and it provides 10% allocation to estuary and Gulf shrimpers to contribute to the fleet's adjustments in response to the significant declines in that fishery. Pour ce qui est des prochaines étapes,
in terms of next steps, there is more work to be done in order to operationalize the Unit 1 fishery for the upcoming season.
The total allowable catch, bycatch, and other management measures, as well as the sharing of the inshore mobile gear fleet and Indigenous allocations. Les pêches du poisson de fond de la crevette dans l'estuaire.
Groundfish and shrimp fisheries in the estuary and Gulf of St. Lawrence have been intimately linked for decades. In 2022, shrimpers' income was at the lowest level in 13 years, and operating costs, that is, fuel prices and wage increases, were at their highest. This negatively influences the profitability of the fishery and the viability of the industry.
season was very difficult. Catch rates in the most frequented fishing areas were less than 40% of the previous year. In response to continued declines, the 2024 total allowable catch was reduced to 3,060 tons, a 79% reduction. Northern shrimp is a cold water species. With warming and oxygen depletion in deep waters, shrimp are exposed to increasingly unfavorable environmental conditions. Notably, redfish predation on shrimp has increased significantly since 2017 and is considered to be a factor in the decline of shrimp. The total estimated biomass of redfish in the Gulf was less than 100,000 in 2013, 100,000 tons in 2013, and by 2021, the biomass was 2.8 million tons. Jusqu'en 2020, les réductions.
Until 2020, reductions in shrimp were partly mitigated by higher prices. Low fishing yields, combined with very high operating costs, exacerbated by COVID-19 and inflation, have created major profitability challenges for the specialized and undiversified fleet.
To improve. Since shrimp play a key role as a forage species in the ecosystem, caution needs to be exercised when exploiting this resource. The Department is working diligently to address the various challenges in both the Gulf shrimp and Unit 1 redfish fisheries, and we'd be happy to take your questions.
Thank you for that. We'll now go to our questions. We'll start off with Mr. Small for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank the officials for coming out today to help us out with this study. Try to make sense of it all. So this is the third time that the minister's been invited to this committee since we came back in the new year. Why is she hiding away and not coming to committee to answer for the mess she's made of the Unit 1 redfish quota allocation for 2024?
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for the question. I'm not able to answer questions related to the minister's schedule and availability.
Okay, well, I guess you can't answer. Well, after 8 years and 6 DFO ministers, you're well aware of who they all were with this NDP Liberal coalition. Minister number 6 has set the Unit 1 redfish quota for a mere 25,000 tons, when science has recommended that it can be 318 metric tons. So why is the minister not responding to science when she's making this allocation, when there are so many factors that are detrimental to the balance of the ecosystem in Unit 1 because of this redfish bloom?
The minister's announcement was that the total allowable catch would be a minimum of 25,000 tons, and further consultation is going to occur next week. A variety of factors will need to be taken into account, including the development of the industry, development of markets, and so next week consultations will be undertaken, and the views of industry will then inform the minister's ultimate decision on what the total allowable catch should be.
So this, Mr. Burns, this Liberal NDP coalition has been in power for 8 years. There's 8 billion people in the world. What have they been doing to try to get a market for redfish? Seems to be nothing. Are you aware of anything that this government's done to promote redfish to the 8 billion people in the world?
DFO's role is as a regulator of the industry, and certainly the minister has directed us to undertake consultations next week to work with industry to understand what their needs and what an appropriate total allowable catch for the introduction of this fishery would be.
There's 70,000 metric tons of bait used in crab and lobster fisheries in Atlantic Canada and Quebec. Has there been anything undertaken to some kind of process to maybe come up with an integrated bait management plan to help redfish harvesters and to bring down the price of bait? Because redfish works for lobster and crab quite well, but has anything been done to promote redfish as the number one bait in Atlantic Canada?
Yeah, I mean, indeed, the department has been working with industry and with provinces and others on options for alternative bait. And indeed, I know that there is some redfish from certainly Unit 1 and possibly Unit 2 redfish that is currently being purchased and sold as bait. Of course, the preference would be for a value-added industry that would provide a greater economic benefit to the coastal communities.
So, Mr. Byrne, I heard you mention the 2,500 tons that was allocated for shrimpers. How much per license is that?
So the minister's announcement was for a
Per vessel.
10% allocation that would go specifically to shrimp-affected harvesters. Consultations next week will include a discussion around how to sub-allocate that quota.
So it's like, what, 50, 60,000 pounds per vessel maybe at this stage?
We're waiting to have the consultation next week to understand how the shrimp fleet itself would like to see that quota distributed.
So that's obviously not going to work for that fleet. So what's your plan for the 4 RST shrimpers now that their shrimp stock has been destroyed by redfish predation, and they're sitting there with $2-3 million vessels tied to the wharf, just laying idle with harvesting capacity ready to roll? What's the plan for them?
So the department's engaged with the shrimp fleet, certainly to understand what policy flexibilities might assist them in adjusting to the significant declines. Of course, the shrimp stock has been declining for a number of years, and some adjustments have already been made to the policy frame, but clearly more will be needed. And in addition to that, the minister did make the allocation of the additional redfish beyond what the shrimp fleet would receive otherwise, as they are all groundfish harvesters as well. And so the minister's also made that allocation to help support their transition.
So in the determining of the Unit 1 redfish quota allocations, what was given the most weight? Was it historical attachment or adjacency?
So the minister sought to advance a couple of key policy objectives in the adjustments to the redfish quota key, both providing an allocation to help shrimp harvesters adjust to the declines in that stock, as well as to advance reconciliation. And the specific distribution of those two quotas will be further consulted on, as I mentioned, next week.
So is the sharing arrangement that's there carved in stone, or what's the minister doing? Does she have any direction? She know where she's going with this, or?
So the minister's announced the fleet shares, and what we'll be doing next week is consulting on the sub-allocation of those fleet shares, how the fleets and the harvesters themselves would like to see those quotas managed within the fleet.
So those allocations, those percentages by fleets and groups, that's carved in stone?
Yeah, that's the minister's already announced those decisions following a prolonged period of consultation that we started back in 2021.
Was the PMO involved
Thank you,
in that?
Mr. Small. You're gone over your time. We'll now go to Mr. Cormier for 6 minutes or less, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je vais avoir probablement la chance de
Thank you,
poser.
Chair. No doubt I'll have an opportunity to ask further questions a bit later on, but I'd like to speak to the technical portion for the first round of questions. Mr. Burns, I believe that there is a firm fishery and it opens later, but in most cases, when this fishery is increased, do you still take into account the history of these fisheries? Yes, that's usually the case. It is clear that reopening of the redfish is the very first time in recent history that we open such a large-scale fishery. It's difficult to speak to specific precedents, but that is the case when we open this kind of fishery. So, this new allocation, we looked at who had a fisheries history, but despite all of this, you nevertheless allocated a quota to others, to other groups. For example, the shrimpsters who did not have a fisheries history. Is that correct? Yes, the fishery was closed for some 30 years, so there were no harvesters who were economically dependent on the redfish fishery. So the department took that opportunity of establishing targets. So I believe that when the first consultation started occurring regarding reopening the redfish fishery, I believe that shrimpsters nevertheless told you and repeated to you that they needed sufficient allocation so that they could move through the shrimp crisis. Did they cite a number to you? A number that they needed? Did they indicate that they needed a 10% allocation or 50% allocation? Were any actual figures shared with them during that consultation period? I don't have that specific information in hand today. Perhaps Sylvain Vézina could respond. He's here. Very quickly, well, do you have any numbers regarding the shrimp fleet, what they needed to move through the difficult moments that they were seeing in their industry? Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry. No, there were no specific figures as to a specific allocation that they would require to move through that difficult period. There was no specific quota mentioned by the shrimpsters. That those 25,000 tons of base or floor quota, as the minister announced recently, your scientists were quite clear that this amount could substantially increase, that some 80,000 tons, if I've understood this correctly, and beyond 300,000 tons. Is that correct? That could be harvested. So the portion of the shrimpsters and other fleets as well could increase. If you're moving from 25,000 to 90,000 to 300 tons, it will increase. We know very well that the current fleet that has the most needs right now are the shrimpsters. Now, as to this additional allocation, despite the initial sharing, at a certain point, could this initial allocation, could the minister, for example, say, well, there is one fleet that is experiencing more difficulties than others, we'll give them a little bit more. That is an additional tag. Are you following me there? I think so. So would it be possible for the minister to make that decision and indicate, well, this is what the fleet is facing currently? And you mentioned earlier it is the new Fisheries Act that is being put in place, provides the minister with the opportunity to do this. Could she make that decision to do this? I think it is up to discretion of the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans to make that decision. Fine, let's come back to shrimp. And you'll recall I mentioned some previous testimonies we had in the past regarding the shrimp industry. In 2022, I put the question to a number of officials from the department. You were saying that shrimp, that is redfish, ate more than 200,000 tons of shrimp per year. And at that point, it was said that there were only 55,000 tons of shrimp left. Wasn't there an unbalance there somewhere that we haven't seen? Because we're blaming climate change. That is one factor of risk. There is heating up of water. But why are we allowing the redfish explode in these kinds of quantities? And why was no decision made earlier to ensure that this would not have a catastrophic effect that it would have on the shrimp biomass and the shrimp fishing industry? Thank you for that question. The nuance is that for the shrimp, we haven't designated the entire area of the Gulf. We're using indicators. And there's some variations in these indicators, yes, but at that time it was 55,000 tons of shrimp in the Gulf, and the redfish was eating 200,000 tons. I'm trying to follow that. We'd have to quantify the entire quality of available shrimp in the Gulf. And another important point, well, if...
We'll now go to Madame Debienne for 6 minutes or less, please.
Je vais vous poser, Monsieur Vézina, une question.
Mr. Vézina, I'd like to ask you a fairly simple question. We saw the harvesters in Quebec demonstrate last Tuesday. In fact, not only were they expressing how upset they are and the fact that they are bitter vis-a-vis to what they saw in previous years, where they already have been indicating for a number of years that there are many redfish, that this is a predator fish for shrimp, that they eat fish, they eat shrimp. In fact, they have focused their economic activities on a single species, that was shrimp. They were plentiful, and that was their history. But in actual fact, these individuals on site, they are the ones who can observe things that we cannot always see in government offices. We don't see this in real time. And they sounded the alarm. And I think this, what made them so bitter last week, is that they have said this. They repeated it several times. They said that it was important to very quickly start fishing redfish before the critical mass would deteriorate shrimp. And the redfish fishery is one of the possible solutions that a number of scientists have indicated, and that would at the very least master or control the shrimp biomass deficit. So why is it that we're now into February and we're seeing announcements of some 25,000 tons, etc., but harvesters are still waiting for the exact date, and they don't want to invest in such a meager quota because there are too many financial risks tied to this. So how can you explain how we have come to this point today? How can this be explained? Mr. Chairman, I know I'm asking this question. Thank you very much for that question. And it is clear that it's been a number of years now that we have held consultations with the industry in order to inform our decision in view of reopening the redfish fishery. Well, I'm sorry, but when you say industry, were Quebec harvesters given the opportunity to be heard? Yes, as harvesters, shrimp harvesters, but also the shrimp fleet, they all have ground fish fishing licenses. A number of different viewpoints were shared during these discussions, and of course, the shrimp harvesters' viewpoints were heard, and they indicated that they wanted to see a quick reopening of this fishery. Many others told us that we should wait for a further development of the market. They had to we had to wait for the actual redfish individuals to be larger, for them to be processed into more high-value products. And as a result, a number of different perspectives were shared throughout the consultations, and they were all taken into account during the period where we continued with the consultations, during which the fishery was not opened up. So, against this backdrop, where there were a number of opinions expressed and that thinking was brought to this for a number of years, I'm still trying to understand. I understand that there are scientists from the Institute Maurice Montaigne who said that the biomass of redfish continued to drop. So apparently this fish is cannibalizing because there's not enough food. So have we not waited too long? Could we not at least say to the harvesters that, yes, we should have listened to you? I don't know if there's scientific evidence that could explain why the redfish population has grown to normal size for that particular species, nor why the population is now falling. I'll turn it over to my colleague. No, we don't quite understand what we're seeing right now. However, other than biomass that we were able to measure, we're starting to track the new cohorts. As of 2013, these are part of our tracking efforts where there was biomass, but also there was the issue raised that we should wait for sufficiently large fish for them to be fished, but unfortunately that didn't continue. So as I understand it, we're opening up a fishery with a very small quota. We're promised that this is a floor, that it will increase. So again, we're putting ships there. We know that in the past we would rake the sea floor, and now we're telling harvesters that they can continue fishes, but we can't guarantee a market because we're not certain that the fish is large enough. And all that time, there's been a small market economy, I know that for major officials in the company, villages aren't very important, but in Quebec, this is an entire peninsula's economy that's at stake, and it's being impacted. So have you taken into account the social, the psychological effects that this has on the villages by making this kind of decision that we received so late at the end of January? And it is scientists who studied this. Well, social economic factors were, of course, taken into account in the minister's decision, and this is why she established a new allocation for shrimpsters to assist them in the transition. And of course, that is the case. And as I indicated previously, the TAC has not yet been established. At the very minimum, it's 25,000 tons, but consultations will continue next week. And this information will inform the minister's decision with respect to the TAC.
Thank you, Madam Debienne. We'll now go to Ms. Barron for 6 minutes or less.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome to our witnesses. Welcome back. My first question, Mr. Burns, there was a letter that was sent out February 5th, 2024, and we have a quote here from Greg Pretty from the FFAW Uniform President. And I just want to read this. He says, the minister has very clearly failed in her responsibility under the Federal Fisheries Act by not prioritizing social, economic, and cultural factors, as well as the preservation and promotion of the independence of independent license holders. And I'm wondering if you can provide some thoughts on that quote and just provide some further insights, please.
So the minister's decision indeed did move some of the previous quota that had been allocated to the offshore fleet and established two new quotas, 10% allocation for shrimp harvesters who are inshore and midshore harvesters, as well as 10% for Indigenous communities in order to further reconciliation. And so the allocation key that the minister announced was indeed one that resulted in a greater proportion of the overall quota going to inshore and midshore vessels than the quota key that existed when the fishery went under moratorium.
Thank you, Mr. Burns, but do you feel that it is enough? I know that there's a change, but through the chair, do you feel that it is enough of a change to support communities and just speaking to the concerns that are being brought to our attention?
So the minister considered a variety of factors in taking the decision, certainly wanting to provide quota to help the Gulf shrimp harvesters transition, to advance reconciliation, and also took into account, certainly a number of other factors based on the consultation the department undertook, discussions she would have had, and so based on all of that information, she made the decision related to the quota key.
Thank you. We know that, as you just referenced, the 10% of the total allowable catch that's being allocated to the Indigenous communities. We did hear from the Qualipu First Nations that have expressed concerns around the allocation of redfish quota to offshore fleets. So there are clearly some concerns that are being expressed by First Nations. Are you hearing any of these same concerns?
So the consultations on the suballocation, including the suballocation of the Indigenous quota, will occur next week, and all of those views, all of that information will be used to inform the minister's ultimate decision on suballocations.
And so the decisions, to be clear through the chair, have not been made currently around how that 10% will be allocated to different Indigenous communities. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Another thing that was brought to my attention, actually, FFAW also brought it up in their letter, but was around the research that's been done since 2018 around the fishing gear that's being used. So basically, an experimental redfish fishery has been in place to collect important fishery data such as capture of underfish. So looking at bycatch, reducing bycatch, and doing so in a more sustainable manner. And I'm wondering if all of this research and ample information that has been collected over the last few years, how that's being utilized in this process.
And my colleague Todd Williams may have something to add. He's the chair of the Redfish Advisory Committee, but certainly it is being analyzed and it is being used, and we'll be using it as a basis for consultation on management measures next week.
That's exactly it. We've carved out time within the agenda next week for these groups to make that information known and to share that research that they've conducted over the past number of years with the experimental fishery and experience in the index fishery as well.
And so has this information been shared with stakeholders who are expressing concerns? I see multiple stakeholders here who are concerned that this information is not going to be used in a valuable way. So I'm wondering if you can share with me what you would say to those stakeholders.
Certainly. So next week, we will be holding a 4-day meeting on which half of that will be dedicated to hearing views from stakeholders and First Nations on their experience in the fishery and their recommendations on fisheries management measures going forward. I can assure them that all of the information that they bring forward to us, either verbally at that meeting or in writing to us, will be part of the record, and we'll provide that information. We'll look at that information, we'll analyze that information, and provide recommendations to the minister.
Great, thank you. I guess my last question, Mr. Burns, can you share a little bit more about how you feel this quantity of quota being allocated to the offshore fisheries, how that benefits local fishers, local communities, and those who are seeing this resource and marine ecosystem right on their front doorsteps being utilized for offshore corporate interests?
Certainly, the minister has made it clear that in terms of the greater than 100 fleet and its activity in the Unit 1 fishery, her focus is on the fact that that fleet is indeed crewed by individuals from coastal communities in Atlantic Canada and Quebec, and that those businesses and the processing facilities associated with them are located in coastal communities in Atlantic Canada and Quebec. So that fleet's revenue and business activities do indeed go to support coastal communities as well.
Thank you, Ms. Barron. We'll now go to Mr. Perkins for 5 minutes or less, please.
Never usually happens, so
We'll see.
So in 2021, I was first elected by defeating Liberal Fisheries number 4, Bernadette Jordan. And quickly after that, I wrote a letter to Liberal Fisheries Minister number 5, Joyce Murray, on the redfish issue, asking about her plans. This was late 2021, early 2022. And in the response, Liberal Fisheries number 5 said, we'll make sure that we do it in a way that license holders, allocation holders can have certainty in their planning of their business affairs. And that was in early 2022. Here we are in 2024, and apparently that means that we still don't have a decision on the TAC. Now, in 2019, Liberal Fisheries number 3 was told that the science supported, the estimate was that the stock was at 4,300 kilotons. And then Fisheries Minister number 5, I'm losing track of the numbers, was told that that's down to 2,500 kilotons, a 42% decline. What's the science say about why?
Thank you, Mr. President, for the question. So it's we don't fully understand why there's a natural mortality that you've described. It's still ongoing. That's something that have started 4 years ago for the deep water redfish, and that we started to see 2 years ago for the Acadia redfish. It is a number of factors, including the environment and also the availability of their prey. We are doing lab study actually to try to understand how much they're impacted by the warming water, the deoxygenation, and so on. That's work that's ongoing, but we have documented that mortality.
In the 5 years since Liberal Fisheries Minister number 3 and Liberal Fisheries Minister number 6, the current one, we've seen this massive 42% decline. What has DFO been doing?
I can take that question, Mr. Chair, and through you to respond. Certainly, for a number of years, we've been engaged in discussions with the fishing industry. And while it's true the biomass was very large and continues to be very large, but is less. The issue that we heard from many parts of the fishing industry was that the individual fish size was very small, and so there would be no value-added benefits from that size fish. There's a minimum size in order to fillet it, for example. And certainly the objective of the industry was to find higher value markets internationally, largely, in order to get the maximum value back into Canada. And that wouldn't be achieved with fish that were extremely small. For reasons that we don't fully understand, this stock has stopped growing in individual fish size at a size smaller than is typical. And so we do believe that the individual fish are not going to reach a size that will largely be able to be filleted. And so that is why the minister, in part took the decision to open now.
Now, Liberal Fisheries Minister number 6 has reallocated 20% of the quota to the Gulf inshore so far, and has said that it will be at least 25 kilotons, I guess, or in the quota. But the science, according to you and everyone else, says it should be at least 88 to 300. What is a sustainable level of fishery catch per license holder? DFO surely has done that calculation in making this change in the quota. What is the minimum sustainable amount that each license holder needs to catch in order to make a living?
So that depends on the vessel and the individual harvesting operations, depending on the nature of that particular boat. And it depends on the value-added markets that can be identified by that particular small business in order to maximize the individual value. So it's actually a very complicated question to answer.
In other words, you're allocating licenses on a mystical tack that you're going to increase sometime in the future, but you don't know what it takes when you reallocate the quota. You have no idea what it takes for somebody to earn a living and how much they need to get. So are you not at 25,000? I believe absolutely no one who is a license holder can make a living.
So, Mr. Chair, first, just to make a point, the minister hasn't issued any new licenses. The quota would be harvested by existing Gulf groundfish license holders. And what I can say there is we are working with the industry and some of the discussions that will occur next week at the consultations regarding various management measures that would help the industry adjust and transfer quotas in order to find the most efficiency within their operations. And we'll also be consulting on the sub-allocations, which is another way of saying the allocation of the individual fleet shares to specific license holders.
Thank you, Mr. Perkins. We'll now go to Mr. Morrissey for 5 minutes or less, please.
And the role of MP Morrissey will be played by Mike Kellaway.
You can't pull that one off, buddy. No way you can pull that off.
I know, I'll try. I kind of want to stay on somewhat the line of questioning of MP Perkins in terms of the economic viability of redfish replacing shrimp entirely as a means of income for shrimpers. So that's to say, is there any amount of redfish that would compensate shrimpers for the losses due to the drilling numbers of shrimp in the Gulf?
Again, it's actually very difficult to do that calculation because of the variables that are outside of the department's control in terms of market value, individual enterprise costs to operate, as examples. And so it's actually very difficult for us to do a calculation that would specifically identify the amount that would be needed to offset the Gulf shrimp declines.
That's because of the size of the fish at this time. Like, what are the reasons why we can't, though? I want to unpack why we can't.
So first of all, the redfish market is underdeveloped. And so in order to find markets that will have a demand for this potential quantity of redfish, and certainly the quantity, well, I can't give you a specific number, it would be significant. These would be new markets that Canadian industry would need to develop and identify. And given the size of the redfish, the specific markets would not be at the higher end of the value range for redfish. And so it makes it very, very difficult to predict what that's going to look like in the sort of midterm.
So let's unpack another thing. So phase one is what we're talking about here. It's the 2,500 tons, is my understanding. What's phase two? Talk to us and to the people that are watching. What is phase two? What is phase two? Because we hear phase one, phase two. What is phase two?
To date, what the minister's indicated is the TAC for 2024 will be a minimum of 25,000 tons. However, she's been clear that she's open to a TAC that is higher than that, and we'll be consulting on that next week. Over the next 2 years, industry allocations will have occurred and market development will have started. Harvesters will have gone out and fished, and based on that, the minister's indicated that she would take decisions related to a longer term for the fishery in terms of a more mature fishery relating to management measures, relating to the overall value of the fishery, and what a longer term TAC might be able to be.
So this is for anyone in the panel. During the last couple of years, I met with a lot of different groups: inshore fishers, offshore fishers, First Nation fishers, and I talked to some of those groups. Mentioned that they were working on marketing anticipation of redfish being open, looking at investing in markets. What do you know of that? Because I'm hearing, well, no one's done any work on marketing anything. Everyone was just waiting around, sitting around, waiting for a decision to be made. Clearly, there was work by DFO on this, because it appears that there was work by fishers and offshore in particular. Can you speak to that?
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. In fact, yes, indeed, we have, while our primary role is to act as regulator, we do support industry when and where we can. And over the course of last year, we worked very closely with a major stakeholder to provide them with the information that they needed, whether it was science information or fisheries management information, so that they could take that to European markets to explore the development of those markets for this product that they anticipated.
We have a lot of challenges. We have some good stories with redfish. That is a good story. And then it's the allocation of where that redfish goes to replace potentially other fisheries. Maybe not. Who knows? Time will tell on that. I guess you highlighted this to some degree, but I want to kind of maybe just get some clarity. When it comes to resources like shrimp, what is the impact of climate change on shrimp? Knowing that there's other things that play a role in the decimation of shrimp, what role does climate change? Because it's seldom do we talk about climate change around the table here in terms of impacting the species.
Brief answer, please.
So, Mr. Chair, it's important because, in fact, the decline of the shrimp started in the mid-2000s before we start to see the strong cord for redfish. It actually limits the suitable habitat for shrimp across the Gulf. So because of the warming of the temperature, because of the acidification of the water and the deoxygenation, it's all factor that has greatly reduced the area of the Gulf that is suitable for shrimp. We have documented that through the years, and that's one of the major factors for the decline, along with other factors like predation from redfish and other predators.
Thank you, Mr. Callaway. We'll now go to Madame Debienne for 2.5 minutes or less, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to address my question to Mr. Vézina, who, of course, focuses more on Quebec. Mr. Vézina. Have you ensured that the voice of shrimpers and harvesters are heard at the department? Have you been successful in ensuring that shrimp harvesters of Quebec were heard and that their concerns were taken into account in the department's decisions? Thank you, Chair. Of course. we have a number of advisory committees who manage the different fish species that we're responsible for. As soon as we saw that there were a number of issues, we had several meetings with the industry to exchange information and to also outline the impacts that we were seeing and to ask them to also provide the information to us. And then it was up to the central office during the last liaison committee and the other committees in Quebec to take over. The minister also work with us and work with industry. But do you have the sense that the minister and the main bodies, as you call them, heard you according to the findings that we have here when it comes to distributing the quotas? Well, thank you. Yes, I'd say that they are fully aware of the situation. They're aware of the issues facing shrimpers in Quebec, and these have all been relegated to our main body. And do you believe that the decisions were the correct ones, and are the shrimpers happy? Well, clearly, the shrimp harvesters are not very pleased with the decision. I agree with that. I understand that, but given today's mandate, the fact that we have a regulator mandate to play, and we also have to ensure that fishery is controlled. This is how we prepare the information.
Madam Debian, you have 4 seconds left, not enough time to ask a question, let alone get an answer. We'll go on now to Ms. Barron for 2.5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, I'll let my colleague, Madame Debian, continue on with her questions for my 2.5 minutes this round. Thank you.
Merci, ma collègue.
Thank you very much to my colleagues. That's very much appreciated. So again, for you, Mr. Vizina. Are you concerned for the fishery in Quebec, for the shrimp harvesters in Quebec? Does this worry you? Thank you for that. Yes, of course, we have concerns for the shrimp harvesters in Quebec. The situation is not an easy one for them at this time. I have very little time. And have you expressed to the central agency at government that these shrimp harvesters will require assistance? Yes, we have communicated that. We've shared the situation of Quebec shrimp harvesters in Quebec, so they will need an alternative. So we're speaking about minimum floor quotas. For a long time now, we've heard that outfitting a vessel is very expensive. It takes a long time. So when you need to prepare for a new type of fishery, it's all the more complicated and costly. It's clear that anybody who is in a business cannot simply jump directly into shrimp or redfish fishery immediately. So what do you tell them to have predictability, to ensure that the Gaspé Peninsula fishing industry might survive? What is it that you're telling them to give them some hope? Well, at this time, all we can do is that we're trying to open the fishery. We're working very hard on opening up the next fishery for shrimp. Next week, we'll have consultations on redfish. That's another option. We're also working with our various departments and officials to see what to do, because we don't necessarily have a specific program, an assistance program in place for the fisheries. We're working hand in hand with the departments to see what we can do. We're also working with a number of different organizations, and that is currently what we're able to do. So who will take on the responsibility for the disappearance of a village, because the fishery is disappearing in the Gaspésie? A number of fishers are keeping their vessels in the wharf, other than climate change. Well, thank you for the question. At this point, as I've mentioned, we're trying to open up the next fishery and to stay in touch with all of the harvesters. We're in ongoing contact, and we survey, we track what is taking place. We do our best given the tools that we have in hand, and we're going to continue to be listening to them. Thank you. Is there a lack of tools?
We'll now go to Mr. Arnold for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll start with Mr. Burns. Mr. Burns, ministers of the department you were the ADM for have stated repeatedly that they are the ultimate decision makers for the ministry and the department. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, the Fisheries Act affords the minister the discretion related to fisheries management decisions.
Thank you.
Yes.
In November 2015, the new Prime Minister released a guidance document for cabinet ministers titled Open and Accountable Government to set out core principles and directions regarding the roles and responsibilities of cabinet ministers, individual ministerial responsibilities like accountability to Parliament. In that document, the Prime Minister stated ministers should place a high priority on supporting the essential work of committees, and this appearing at committees whenever appropriate. Minister Labouthier has now been the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans for over 7 months and has attended the committee once on October 26, 2023. In that same period, this committee that the Prime Minister directed the Minister to provide priority support to has been visited by the Deputy Minister Gibbons twice, Regional Director General Wenzel 3 times, and you as Assistant Deputy Minister Burns on 5 occasions. The Prime Minister's guidance to ministers also clearly stated, and I'll quote, public servants do not share in the minister's constitutional accountability to Parliament. Since February 6th, the minister has declined 3 requests for appearances from this committee that we passed unanimously with all member support because we believed it appropriate to hear from the minister herself because she is supposed to be accountable to this committee and to the Canadians we represent. My office was informed that the minister's office provided the committee clerk with no reasons for the minister's refusal to attend the committee, as we unanimously requested her to on February 6th, February 8th, and February 13th of this year. I don't wish to be inhospitable to the officials before us today, but I am suspect that we might be, in fact, thinking the same thing, that you might be thinking the same thing I am. The same thing that the Prime Minister's 2015 guidance stated. Servants do not share the minister's, public servants do not share the minister's accountability to Parliament. Every day our offices hear from Canadian harvesters worried about their livelihoods and coastal communities, Canadians who depend on marine resources like fisheries, Canadians pushed to anger because they are ignored by the minister as they were by her predecessors, 5 predecessors in fact. The whole point of Parliament is democracy, and it should be the opposite of tyranny. I'm starting to wonder what we call a government that tramples on the livelihoods and communities of the people it is supposed to represent and work for. And how can this committee support better decisions and policies from the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans when she won't even show up? I know there are fires burning in the minister's portfolio that she was assigned to, but ignoring affected Canadians and their elected representatives only makes things worse. It seems the minister is trying to evade failures of her ministry by trying to evade accountability and evade the elected representatives of this committee who do, in fact, have valuable points to contribute towards solutions. I want to thank the witnesses for being here and commend you on your unending commitment to being deployed time and time again as human shields for ministers who simply refuse to fulfill their constitutional accountability to Parliament. Now, Mr. Burns, I was astonished earlier when I heard you say in response to a question of what quota numbers had been requested by the harvesters. This meeting and study was specifically on redfish allocation and quotas. And you stated you weren't able to provide that to the committee. You came to this meeting knowing that that was what was going to be discussed. How do you explain not having those answers?
My colleague Sylvain Vézina indicated that indeed a specific quantum hadn't been identified by that fleet.
I'll pass the rest of my time to Mr. Perkins.
Okay, one question. When will it? When will it be set?
Well, next week we'll be consulting with with the Redfish Advisory Committee to inform the sub-allocation decisions. The minister's decisions related to the overall quotas, the allocation key has been taken and was informed by consultations that have taken place since 2021.
So you don't
Thank
know.
you, Mr. Perkins. A little bit over time. We'll now go to Mr. Cormier for 5 minutes or less, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Ici, on veut s'estiner comme
Thank
il y a
you,
de-
Chair. And it appears that we're focusing a great deal on the Fisheries Minister. I think the former Minister, Guerochet, has never appeared before the committee. Mr. Chair, and I'd like to come to Mr. Burns, if I may, or somebody else in your office. One of the main concerns of fishers, whether these be shrimp harvesters or inshore fleets, is those major fishing boats that come back in the Gulf. You remember 1967, Minister Labatt was minister and has forbidden these very large vessels to come into the Gulf. How many more than 100-foot vessels are able to come into the Gulf to fish redfish in the Gulf? And these are Canadian boats that I'm speaking about.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for the question. We currently don't have a policy which prevents large vessels over 100 feet from fishing in the Gulf. We do know that there are 9 offshore license holders.
Do they own boats over 100 feet? Yes or no?
I would imagine yes.
How many?
I don't have the number on hand. We can search
Okay,
it back
perfect.
together.
So we just opened a fishery that was closed for 30 years. I think that we almost all agree that, that fishery closed in big part because of this big vessel that was catching major amount of fish. I agree with that.
I think the evidence related to the decline of the Gulf redfish fishery is actually related to a variety of factors at the time in the 90s.
But they contribute, right?
I don't know. Do you have that science information?
Oh, come on.
Like, we're here for answer. They contribute. So look, let me rephrase that this way. We've been talking for years for a sustainable fishery, a fishery that will respect more the community, that will benefit communities. And we're saying that we're going to allow big boats again coming in the Gulf of San Juan, something that the minister back then in 1997, Mr. Romero Leblanc, said no more big boats in the Gulf of San Juan. Don't you think that, with our objective of having more a sustainable fishery, you said it in your speech, we want to have more of like opportunity for inshore fishers. Don't you think that we should look very carefully at that and not allow those big boats coming in the Gulf of San Juan so we don't have another decline of these fisheries for years to come?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. And certainly the minister has addressed the issues related to the greater than 100-foot vessels and indicated that, from a conservation perspective, any risk of conservation concerns to the fishery will be managed as a result of the fishery being managed through attack and fleet shares, which will be monitored. She's also indicated that there is not currently a policy in the department related to these vessels fishing in the Gulf of St. Lawrence.
OK, d'accord, M. Byrne, puis je ne vais pas vous couper, mais est-ce que
I don't want to cut you off, but Mr. Lebon, 1974 decided not to authorize large vessels in the Gulf. Was there a policy in place at the time, or did Mr. Blanc take that decision as minister?
So, est-ce que Madame la ministre pourrait dire
And can Madam Minister say that I will allow no such large vessels in the Gulf? Can she say this?
Focus is on where the economic benefits are going, and has indicated that as long as there are local crew on board the vessels and that the vessels are contributing to coastal communities, that's her focus in terms of the fishery.
Okay. Si je reviens au niveau des crevettiers, ce sont eux qui les
I'd like
plus...
to come back to the shrimp harvesters. They are the most impacted at this time because we know that their resources is almost completely depleted. We're almost heading into a shrimp moratorium. So other than the allocation that has just been set for the redfish, are you already considering other types of assistance that could be given to the shrimp harvesters?
In order to ensure that the full suite of available Government of Canada supports is available to this fleet to help in their transition. And certainly we're working diligently to ensure that's the case.
Monsieur Vignon, rapide.
Thank you, Mr. Cormier. Your 5 minutes is up. We'll now go to Mr. Bragdon for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for appearing today. Appreciate you taking the time and coming. I know it has been referenced, but we must reference it yet again, that there is someone missing at this table today and should be here. And that is the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans, who should be answering at this time of crisis for many who have been affected by the dwindling shrimp stocks and their livelihoods are at risk. And this has been identified as an area of potential revenue generation for those who have been affected, as well as others that perhaps are in the coastal communities that are being affected as well throughout the region that affects no less than 5 provinces directly. So I would just like to know and get a sense from you today, whereas we know that the most valuable stakeholders, and I believe where some of the most valuable of input can come from, are those whose livelihoods depend most upon the fishery. There are no greater protectors and stewards of the future stocks in our oceans off our coast here in Canada than those whose very communities and the existence of their livelihoods and generations of families have depended upon the fruits of the sea for their livelihood. I think the input, if I'm not mistaken, that's been coming from the harvesters and from those coastal communities has been pretty overwhelming as it relates to opening up the fishery and expanding the amount of quota that can be given as it relates to redfish. I think what they're saying is, let's get on with it and let's make this expansive and meaningful so that it can become a way of helping them make ends meet at the end of the day. How much consultation has the minister herself done with the harvesters and the coastal communities in a meaningful way? And how much has she listened to the provincial ministers of fisheries who are very close to the situation and are certainly aware of the challenges they're facing? Can you provide us a little bit of insight on that, Mr. Burns?
Thanks, Chair. And certainly, as I mentioned earlier, I don't have a specific line of sight on the minister's day-to-day schedule, but I can say that I'm certainly aware of a number of meetings that she has had in which redfish allocations have been part of the discussion. In addition to that, the department is undertaking very robust and detailed consultations over a number of years, and all of that input and those views have also been provided to the minister and have helped inform her decisions. I will note that certainly the minister so far has not taken a decision on the total allowable catch, has indicated that 25,000 is the absolute minimum she will entertain. And next week we'll be consulting with industry on an appropriate TAC. Redfish is an interesting species in that it has episodic recruitment, and so it's not a regular cycle of new fish coming into the fishable biomass. And so you do have to manage it in a way that spreads out the harvest, because when you take fish out this year, it's not there next year, and it isn't going to be replaced instantly through the regular recruitment that we see in a lot of other species. And so part of that needs to be taken into account as we make plans for management of this fishery so that market development can occur. In the context of the projected duration of this pulse of biomass, which is a decade or less. And so we need to consult with industry to understand their market development plans, the pace that they would like to see the TAC grow over the coming years, so that they can extract the maximum value out of this fishery as well, to the benefit of those coastal communities.
Thank you, Mr. Burns. And just to follow up on that, I think you could provide perhaps some clarity. Could you summarize the input that you're getting from the harvesters who are closest to it as to what they feel the quota should be? What are the input and what are you hearing in regards to that at this point? I'm sure it's a much greater level than perhaps of what we're hearing reported so far as the minimum. Can you give this committee an idea of what they're recommending, the harvesters themselves, those that could be impacted by this?
So certainly to date, we haven't had specific consultations on that. That's scheduled for next week. I'm well aware of the views that have been expressed.
I have to stop you just right there, Mr. Burns. I'm sorry, but I have to stop you there. There has not been discussions up to this point yet with those who are most impacted by this decision. And the minister has not yet meaningfully consulted with the harvesters about what the catch rate should be or what the amount of quota should be. And you've just made a big announcement, the government, the minister's made a big announcement, and yet there has not been that level of consultation. I would think one of the first levels of consultation the minister should undertook was directly with the harvesters and those whose livelihoods depend upon the sector. The fact that this is happening now or next week, and already announcements have been made, there's something wrong with that. We've got to get this back right to where the fishery and those whose livelihoods depend upon it are valued and prioritized when it comes to these big decisions. For far too long, we've had study after study and report after report, but again, it seems like the voices of the harvesters and the coastal communities get ignored. And I'm not meaning this towards you, it's the frustration towards the whole system and towards the minister in not properly consulting with those most affected by the decision.
Thank you, Mr. Bragdon. Your time has gone over a little bit. We'll now go to Mr. Cormier for 5 minutes or less, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Look,
Thank you, Chair.
The Minister of Fishery was here once already. She's only been 6 months in. Former Minister of Fishery, Gail Shea, only came twice to this committee in the 2.5-year period. Let's get serious here and let's ask some question. So, Mr. Burns.
Mr. Burns, I'd like to come back to the redfish fishery. This represents a great deal of hope for some harvesters who had lost hope. It's supposed to open on May 15th. Is that not correct? The fisheries for redfish.
Yes, that is correct. However, the fishing itself would probably not start until June 15th because of spawning closures.
Okay, so vous venez de le dire tantôt. On sait pas
said it earlier. We don't know if there are available markets. We don't know at all how this fish can be sold at which cost and what will be done with it. Nor do we know whether or not harvesters are ready to fish redfish. For example, shrimp harvesters are not ready. Their vessels are not adapted to this. So don't you believe that even if the fishery opens on May 15th, that shrimp harvesters, and I'm speaking about shrimpers because the large corporations won't have any difficulties. For example, even indigenous people. Do you really think that they'll be able to make money and to cover their costs once the fishery opens? Well, the market development was predicated on the expectation that these fish would be processed. Unfortunately, that hasn't been the case. They would be large enough so that they can be processed, but next week we'll be holding consultations with the industry to provide information on a number of things, including the management measures that will be put in place to ensure that harvesters can exchange their quotas to invest this on the vessels so that they can fish this year. However, even though some of the fishers will not go out and fish themselves, it's possible that they will receive money by selling their quota to other harvesters. Thank you very much. Now, if the shrimp harvesters, let's say, if the situation stayed as it is now, with a 25,000 ton quota, that's about 60, 70,000 tons per harvester. Do you really believe that they'll be able to make money with that? Well, next week we're holding consultations to identify how the quotas will be distributed to the fleets. Yes, so my question is this. Do you know how much it takes right now for a vessel owner that is a shrimp harvester to cover their costs and make money? Do you know what it takes? Yes, and Mr. Vizina could also add to that. So let me continue on that. Now, a fishery is being opened. We don't know if that redfish can be sold, have any plants approached you to explain that they're ready to process that fish. Have you had that? Because have you spoken to the processing industry to see whether or not the plants are ready to process the red fish and sell it and identify markets? Have you had those discussions? Yes. But unfortunately, the fish are not sufficiently large so that they can be processed extensively. So why are we opening up a fishery? As was requested earlier, of course, it is possible. And the industry is currently trying to identify international markets for these fish. And it is possible that part of the biomass would have reached the appropriate size to be processed, although the vast majority will not be. So you will be there to help the fishers to modernize. You've indicated that, yes. Now, with respect to an assistance plan, I've looked at everything that was done in 1990 when there was the cod moratorium. Did you look at what was put in place at that time, when we really saw a complete depletion of the cod stock, and what is being put in place to assist harvesters who will be experiencing difficulties, as well as the indigenous persons, people, and the inshore fleets? Well, yes, of course, we looked at previous programs. At the time being, we don't have a mandate to put in place such a program. However, we are working with other government departments to ensure that all of the available measures and programs be there and be available for this fleet. Thank you.
Please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je vous remercie quand même
Thank you,
d'être.
Chair. I would like to thank you for being here. I think it is very good that you're here, and again, I would like to thank you. I know that it's not an easy thing. What I'm told on site is that Mr. Blanchet, my colleagues, Ms. Michaud, we consulted fishers. We again met them last week at the Fourchette Bleue. And they don't feel that their concerns are taken into account. They don't feel that they're being listened to, especially the shrimp harvesters of Quebec, as well as other fishers, and that's a whole other area, the mackerel fishers. Now, I put this question to the minister in the House. I said, are we going to be watching the painful and slow death of this fishery in Quebec, and even, with seals? We saw that with cod, and now seals are eating all the cod. But in Quebec, it's as if it was unreal. What we saw last year, it was a very emotional expression of discouragement. And I'm now asking you this question. In a perfect world, in order to help the fishery, to support the expertise of these people, to ensure a new generation, and to also maintain this know-how, and to support sustainable fishery, because we know that these giant vessels previously deteriorated biomass, and it will happen again. So given that, is the government sufficiently open to support a sustainable fishery for the owner, fish harvesters, to enable them to survive, to create jobs, and to assure that there will be a next generation? Is that part of your plans for Quebec? Of course. Yes, in 2019, specific regulations were put in place to manage endangered fish stocks. But yes, and we are working with science and with our fish management experts to develop ecosystemic fishery and that take into account many considerations other than a single species, so that we can properly manage the ecosystem to better take into account the interactions between the different species, the impact of climate change as well on them, in order to improve and better manage the fish stocks in this area at this time of a change of ecosystem. This is very important work that is done to better informs decisions on the fishery in Canada.
Minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to ask a quicker question and then allocate the remainder of my time to my colleague, Madame Desbiens. One thing I'm trying to understand, and this has been asked in many different ways, I guess from some of my colleagues, but I'm not understanding how allocating to offshore, commercializing or this corporatizing, I should say, this fishery is of benefit of us moving forward with the sustainable fisheries. We know that the inshore fishers, local fishers, are the ones who understand best what's happening out on the water. They're better able to provide the data required for us to be able to determine the best steps forward. They're able to, provide observations like the size of the fish and so on. Vital information for the best decisions forward. Also, they are the ones that are invested in the sustainability of the fisheries. And we know from past practices that much of the reason why we've gotten in the positions that we have is because of the fact that we had those who were not invested in the coastal communities, who were not invested in the sustainability of local fisheries, making decisions that were poor decisions. And so I just want to get your thoughts on how to not repeat this pattern of behavior where we are setting local communities up and local fishers up for failure. Instead, how do we set up that sustainable fisheries by using local fishers? Why are we not doing that here?
So the minister's decision did indeed transition some of the previous offshore quota to Indigenous groups as well as the Gulf shrimp harvesters. And the minister indicated that her view is that the important thing is that the offshore fleet is also crewed and owned by Canadians and coastal communities. And certainly we collaborate and work with the fishing industry, whether it be small inshore vessels and the fleet representatives of those small inshore vessels, or with the offshore fleet, in order to undertake a variety of data gathering exercises and indeed full fish stock surveys, depending on the particular fishery. And so certainly we work closely with the fishing industry throughout the spectrum of vessel sizes and geographic locations on the sustainable management of the fishery. And the observation that I would make on that is that all of the sectors are very focused on the sustainable management of the fishery and the long-term success of their operations.
Thank you, Ms. Barron. This expires your time. We'll now go to Mr. Spall for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm looking at the historical allocations here. Mr. Burns, offshore 74.22%. Now, I'm not arguing with your methodology or anything here, but over here, I've got a graph that shows 40% offshore in 1978 and 60% inshore. And it's the redfish quota is like a game of musical chairs. Is it a quota that's ever been structured between inshore and offshore? Has it ever been fixed? And how did you come up with the? Because history's history. It can't be a snapshot of 1 year, 1994. So how did you come up with the historical allocation? Because if there was a 60% number in the inshore back in 1978, that should be a factor in what you would call an historical allocation. Oh?
So the structure of the fishery certainly evolved over time. The minister's decision and the relative changes to the various fleet shares that were part of her announcement related to the allocation key that was in place at the time the fishery was put under moratorium in 1994.
Okay, I just had to ask that question. That's all, because numbers are numbers, and so when will harvesters know what their allocations are going to be? Because they got to gear up. is it going to be mid-June or 1st of July, like the Northern Cod announcement comes out usually about that time? I mean, is it going to be timely? And is your department making strides to announce quotas and allocations earlier than it did? I mean, the last 5 or 6 years has been unbelievable how late the announcements has been coming out. So, how fast will the various fleets know how much redfish they're going to have for 2024?
Well, certainly the fleets themselves know the percentage shares that they'll be getting now based on the minister's announcement. The consultations will occur next week, and the minister will take a decision informed by those consultations after that.
So you've got 25% here basically for the mobile otter trawlers and the shrimp fleet combined, pretty much. So is it possible that you could give them their full 25% of the maximum quota allocation? If some other fleet sector is not ready to prosecute it, and this fleet is, and there's a market, well, for bait, of course, because this year I'm hearing talk of squid being sold to Atlantic crabbers for over $3 a pound, being imported from Argentina. $2 a pound mackerel from Norway. Like, this doesn't have to be when redfish has been proven to work so well. So, is there any way that you can expedite the allocation for the inshore fleet to support their coastal communities?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for that question. I think it's important to recognize that next week we are seeking the views of harvesters. We know that some will be ready to fish immediately. We know others won't. We want to maintain flexibility and be adaptive and pivot where need be, and to respond to the interests of those harvesters that are ready. And we know in phase 1 there will be some adjustment from year 1 to year 2, and then into phase 2.
So, will it be an IQ fishery or will it be an index fishery?
We're going to look at a number of options, and I want to hear the views of those stakeholders and those harvesters to see what they have. And it might be different based on the fleet as well and their situation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Small. We'll now go to Mr. Cormier for 5 minutes or less, please.
Mr. Burns, la pêche.
Thank you, Mr. Burns. Opening of the redfish fishery, unfortunately, may not be what we expected it to be because of what I said, because of the processing issues, the market, etc. Do you commit to present to the minister other options, whether it's assistance and all of this, in order to come to the assistance to the individual shrimp fishers, the ones who are currently being impacted by the drop in their shrimp biomass? Do you commit to recommending these options to the minister in order to assist this fleet? I can tell you that right now, we don't have that mandate. I work hand in hand with other departments. You're assistant deputy minister. You have a team with you. It is up to you to do this work. Will you be looking at other possible options if, unfortunately, the redfish fishery does not pan out as it is supposed to at opening? All I can tell you right now is that we don't have the mandate for that kind of program, but clearly we are working to ensure that the available programs be available to all of the harvesters. And as well, we're working, of course, in order to establish the minister's decision regarding the redfish fishery to set the allocation.
Calway.
Thank you, Mr. Cormier. And how much time do we have? 3 minutes. So let's stay on MP Cormier's line of questioning, and we'll go beyond the economic assistance with respect to fishers. So are there any tools or regulatory changes the minister and and DFO could put in place to help shrimpers lower the cost burden of their work?
So my colleague Sylvain Vézina could speak in more detail, but we've certainly been working with the shrimp fleet on various policy flexibilities that might be able to assist the industry in adjusting and adapting to the changes in the ecosystem that have resulted in this significant reduction in the shrimp biomass.
Okay.
My colleague can speak in more detail to that if you'd like.
Can you elaborate on that, please?
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Parmi les mesures, là, il y a des
Thank you,
mesures
Chair. The measures include measures that include the transfer of quota up to 100% between fishers. That may be more profitable for each action, and it's the body up one, where a number of fishers can also use the same vessel to reduce costs. To buddy up, in fact, those are the main measures that are in place, and of course we are listening to the harvesters to see whether or not there are other measures that we could work on to come to their assistance.
What, and I lost a bit in the translation there, so you may have touched upon this, but on, I think it was January 26th, the minister instructed officials to be more flexible with shrimp license holders, allowing them to twin up. I'm not sure if you brought that up in your answer because I lost a bit in the translation, but I'm wondering if you or people here, Zoom and in person, can you elaborate on that in terms of the practice and its benefits of potentially doing that?
Adam, veux-tu y aller?
Yep, go ahead.
Adam, can you go ahead? I'm sorry.
Yes, please go ahead,
Sylvain.
Sylvain. Please go ahead, Sylvain.
No, I'm sorry because I didn't understand the question, so that's why I asked Adam if you could.
Sure. I can answer.
Can you answer that?
No,
Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair. We certainly have been working with the industry on what policy flexibilities within the management of that shrimp fleet would be useful for them. Mindful that the harvesters themselves are better able to identify the flexibilities that would be effective than we are. And so we are working on that. I think my colleague did reference buddy up,
okay.
wherein two harvesters can operate from the same vessel, thus reducing their cost. As an example, some of those measures have been put in over the course of the last decade as the stock has been coming down, and so we're working with the fleet on what else might be of use for them this year.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. We'll now go to Mr. Perkins for 5 minutes or less, please.
Mr. Chair, I'll start first with the question from Mr. Small, and then it'll come back to me.
Your time. Do what you like with it.
Thank you, Mr. Perkins. Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's been some rumblings that the PMO directly interfered in this redfish allocation. Is that possible?
I wouldn't be aware of such political discussions.
Is that why the minister's not here today? Because it wasn't her decision and she doesn't feel like she has to answer for it? Maybe the Prime Minister should be here.
I can't speak to the minister's availability, Mr. Chair.
Well, I mean, that's what I'm hearing from stakeholders, that the PMO got directly involved in this decision, and the direction came down from the PMO. And I've got a question for you. How much say are the ENGOs having, such as Oceans North and Oceania, because they're coming out now and saying we shouldn't fish this redfish? Do they have a seat at the table on this decision?
So environmental groups do indeed participate in some of our advisory committees, and their perspectives are also shared with the minister and are used to help inform the minister's considerations related to the sustainable management of fisheries.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to go back to a question some of us have been asking about timing. So my understanding, and the officials probably have a more precise thing, is that there's a sort of a prime period, like any species, for fishing redfish, which starts, there's a late spring early summer season. I don't know about the summer, but then again in the fall. So in order to do the consultations that you're doing and to make the decisions that you have to do on the TAC and the allocation per license, will all of that be done so that there can be a spring season, or is the spring, early summer season gone and we're now really talking about a fall season?
Thanks, Chair. And just to correct myself for the last question, the environmental groups in the case of the Redfish Advisory Committee are observers to that committee and not participants directly. In terms of the member's question, Mr. Chair, there are a number of considerations that will need to be taken into account in terms of the management measures to avoid bycatch, protect the spawning occurrence, and so on. But our objective and what we're working towards, and I see no issue with achieving that, is that there would be a summer fishery. The spawning closure is until June 15th, so the first actual fishing opportunity would likely begin then.
Begin then, but not before. So you think you can get through the process you're going through by then, allocate the quota to the individual license holders, and then actually start the season in time?
Yeah, so the minister would need to take the sub-allocation decisions as well as the other management plan decisions, and that is the plan that we're working towards, is to have the fishery able to be open for that June 15th.
So obviously there's been some discussion around the minister's announcement around the allocation of percentages in terms of access and licenses, and 20%, mostly going from the offshore to the inshore to two different commercial groups. All of this current structure and arrangement goes back to the Atlantic sharing arrangement, I think, of the 1990s, where this was set out for redfish, was it not? How did we come to this stage where the allocations or the percentages are what they are, and now there's a shift, and we're having some discussion of whether that shift is enough?
So I can't speak to the specifics of the evolution of the quota key through the 80s and early 90s. I can say that there absolutely was changes. There was the establishment of a fleet structure that occurred, I think, in the 80s, but I'm not able to speak to the specifics of that. But certainly, by the time the fishery went under moratorium in 1994, there was the established quota key that we're referring to now, that had the offshore and the various mid and inshore allocations, which is the basis upon which the minister's decision is founded.
Now, we've always sort of gone by a willing buyer, willing seller policy of DFO. So if there are going to be more allocation changes, will DFO consider the willing buyer, willing seller policy, or will that be disregarded as it's been with the Elvers?
So in the case of the redfish fishery, it's been a fishery under moratorium for over about 30 years, I guess. Almost exactly 30 years, I think, if my math is correct. And so on that basis, that sort of generation that has passed, there is not that economic dependence on this fishery. And so the minister did take the opportunity to advance some policy objectives, including supporting the Gulf shrimp fleet. But your question regarding willing buyer, willing seller, it remains the preferred approach in terms of transitioning access to Indigenous communities in response to their rights-based harvesting activities.
Thank you, Mr. Perkins. We'll now go to Mr. Morrissey for 5 minutes or less, please. Or Mr. Kellaway.
Okay.
The new Mr.
We're back to me. That's good stuff. I kind of want to go back to some facts here. So the consultations. How long are the consultations? Because we're getting some mostly good feedback in terms of ideas, suggestions, and recommendations from many members here. What's the length of time in terms of the consultations that will help inform further decisions that will be made potentially by the minister?
Thank you very much, Chair. I can speak to that question. So looking at consultations, next week there were 4 days of meetings in Halifax. The first 2 days focused on fisheries management measures, including TAC recommendations from harvesters. The other 2 days focused on sub-allocations for those various fleets. We'll provide them another week for written commentary, and the minister will be making a decision on the TAC and any other key fisheries management decisions to get this fishery operationalized and underway by mid-June. And I would just add, of course, the consultation period does extend beyond that. For example, with Indigenous consultations, one could not expect to start and complete these consultations within the next couple of months. That will continue on, again, in time for phase 2 of the minister's announcement in a couple of years for those sub-allocations, as an example.
Right. So for those watching at home and for us here, who's being invited, who's being engaged to come to these consultations in terms of providing feedback from an offshore perspective, an inshore perspective, and a First Nations perspective? And if I'm missing other groups, please tell me. I want to try to get this back into a fact box.
Sure. Okay. So over the past 2 years, we've engaged and consulted anyone who has had a stake in the fishery historically or wish to gain access to the fishery, for example, First Nations. Which represents dozens of various groups. Those are the same groups that we're continuing to engage and consult with. The terms of reference of this advisory committee is not yet established, just as the fishery is not yet established. The environmental non-governmental organizations are listed as observers. In some committees, they are members. We'll discuss that as a group once things get solidified in terms of that advisory committee. Provincial representatives are also there. Our goal is to be inclusive, but to obviously keep it directed as to those who are most impacted by this fishery and have a stake in this fishery.
Minutes. I'm just, it's more of a comment, but you know, if you look at the redfish quota, you look at reopening the redfish, it's a pretty big deal. We've heard today about the need for consultation. That's also a pretty big deal. We have groups like the shrimpers that are having a difficult time and will continue to have a difficult time if we don't look at innovative ways to help that particular fishery. That's why it's really important to get this information out from this committee to you folks, but also to inform the people that will be consulted. And let's highlight that again around, it's important to this committee to not play he said, she said. We need to know exact facts. There's too much on this at stake here with respect to a new fishery, which is a good news, but also how do we help other fisheries? And that's where your consultation comes in. And I think it's important to clear that up because there is consultation going to happen. There's a lot of thought that went into the minister's decision, that the recent decision, but that there's more information to come. There's more feedback to be had. And that's really, really important as we kind of highlight what's been done, what needs to be done going forward on redfish and support and help for fishers, in particular the shrimpers that we're here today to talk about. But I yield my time, Mr. Chair.
You're close enough for me to cut you off.
Thank you.
So thank you for that, Mr. Callaway. We'll now go to Madame Debienne for 2.5 minutes or less, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. As you know, I initiated this emergency request because there is urgency in Quebec. And earlier you spoke about buddying up. That is, you take all of the licenses, the quotas, and you take one vessel instead of 3, and you go to fish and you try to spend some fishing moments together. So that is a solution that is being presented. Then the other solution that was flagged is that you wait for what we've already been waiting for since October, where we received the shrimp data. And again, next week, we'll still be waiting. Now, we have fish harvesters who tell us that if at the very least our licenses were worth something, if we could buy them back, let's say some of them are retired, maybe we could restructure our lives. Is this an option that you're considering? Is it something that you are looking at, that you're studying? The minister does not have the mandate to do that, but who has that mandate? You keep saying that the department does not have one, but if you don't have a mandate, if there's a crisis, one has to be creative to find solutions. Vessels are being sold. There, Mr. Cormier mentioned this, and there will be some in Quebec as well. Let's be creative. That's why we're here. Is there opening to this? Are you giving thought to this? I understand that it's not part of your mandate, but I think maybe we need to find mandates. Because there are people who will be out of work, whose vessels are worth nothing. They can't sell their vessels. Nobody buys back their licenses. There is no fishery. They're human beings. I understand that they're fish, but they're also human beings, and we have to take care of them. They've paid taxes all their lives to, at the end, get back some kind of services. And of course, we are working with the other government departments who do have programs that provide benefits, and we're working with them to ensure that all of these programs are available to the shrimp harvest industry to assist them in this transition. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Debienne. We'll now go to Ms. Barron for 2.5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair. My last two questions. So first question I had, Mr. Burns, can you please explain in a little bit more detail? I know you had said that the process has not been undertaken yet to sit down and consult and with Indigenous communities. But can you please share a little bit about what that process is going to look like, what Indigenous communities can expect, and how there's going to be an assurance that this is not, for lack of a better words, a tokenistic activity, more so a deep, meaningful consultation with Indigenous communities?
Thank you very much for the question. Indeed, that's exactly the approach that we wish to take. We have engaged First Nations and Indigenous communities over the past 2 years. Now that we have a set amount, we are in a much better position to consult fully with those First Nations, those communities that have identified an interest in the fishery itself. And in fact, there are many First Nations, or several First Nations communities that have participated in this fishery over the past number of years, either in the index fishery or the experimental, and wish to continue in that. So we'll be consulting them and in a meaningful way, and again, over the next couple of years towards phase 2 to lock in those sub-allocations.
Thank you. My last question is, we were talking about the closure generations ago, and we've talked a lot about the learnings. You know, we haven't really talked about the learnings, but we were talking about that process and where we are today. And I'm wondering if, without having to get into too much of the science, but what are the key things that the minister is going to be looking at to ensure that we are not making the same mistakes from the past? So if you can share sort of the, top level things that are going to be considered in this process.
Certainly over the last 30 years, the department has implemented a variety of policy frameworks that help ensure the sustainable management of fisheries, the precautionary approach framework, amongst others. We've also, in 2019, the Fisheries Act was amended to create the fish stock provisions, which places new requirements on the minister in terms of her management decisions related to stocks in the critical zone in particular. And as I mentioned earlier, we are also now embarking on advancing work related to ecosystem approaches to managing fisheries that will allow us to better take into account species interactions, environmental changes, and other factors. This is cutting-edge work. It's not an approach that is broadly used anywhere in the world, but we are working on advancing that work as well. And so all of those lessons and all of that progress means that we're in a very different place in terms of our knowledge and ability to sustainably manage fisheries than we were 30 years ago. And so because of that, we are able to establish a much more robust management regime for this fishery and for other fisheries that hopefully will open in the coming years, and we'll be able to therefore manage them in a much more sustainable way for the long term as possible.
Thank you, Ms. Barron. We'll now go to Mr. Arnold for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't think I'll need my full 5 minutes, so I will share with Mr. Perkins or Mr. Small. But I will start out by asking Mr. Burns, The minister has set a quota of only 25,000 metric tons when scientists recommended a maximum total allowable catch of 85,000 metric tons up to 310,000 metric tons. Less than 10% of potential TAC set by the minister. Why such a low TAC?
So the minister's announcement related to a minimum tax. She has indicated she's open to a tax higher than that, but
But I thought you said earlier that that TAC had been set, that was set in stone. Was I mishearing what you stated today?
the fleet shares have been established by the minister, so that is the overall percentage going to the offshore, the midshore, et cetera.
Very different than the TAC.
But the minister's TAC, the total allowable catch, that would then be divided based on the fleet
So
shares.
even if she increased the TAC, the percentages would not change from what has been
The
announced.
percentages would guide how the TAC is divided.
Guide or the TAC
Would be
percentages-
how it is divided.
The TAC
Yeah.
percentages would not change?
So the fleet shares would not change. The TAC is the total allowable catch, which is the quantum of fish that can come out of the water. The fleet shares are how that quantum is divided between the different interests in the
Okay,
fishery.
back to my initial question, why was the tax set so low? Was that to allow the minister leeway to potentially appease those that didn't feel they were receiving enough tax?
The minister hasn't set the TAC yet. She indicated the minimum would be 25,000, but that she directed the department to undertake further consultation with industry, including with the processing sector, in order to inform a final TAC, which will be established following next week's consultations. One of the concerns the minister expressed was the processing capacity, which links to that market development. And so the importance of ensuring that fish isn't just coming out of the water and not generating economic benefit. And so we'll be working with the fishing industry, including the processing sector next week, to help inform the minister's final decision on an appropriate level
And I want to
of
go
removals for
back
this
to
year.
some other questions. You were questioned about what the minimum harvest tax for the sectors or for vessels would be, and you couldn't even provide a range for that, and yet you're able to provide a range of anywhere from 85,000 to 310,000 metric tons as a TAC. You can't provide a range of what might be viable for a vessel to make it viable for them to gear up and actually hire crew and go out.
So the department isn't privy to the specific operating costs of a particular vessel. That's commercially confidential information that isn't shared with the department. We are also not privy.
Nothing is done in the economic department within the fisheries, within DFO, to determine any of that information?
So we have general data that would inform at a fleet level what different cost structures may be. In the case of the redfish fishery, though, because the market is underdeveloped and it is still an unknown what the overall value of the removals of the processed product, if it is processed further, would be. It's very difficult for us to identify a specific quantum that would lead to viability for a specific fleet.
The millions and billions that this department receives in budget and the estimate transfers, I'm shocked that they cannot even come up with some of these numbers. I'll pass the rest of my time on to, I believe Mr. Perkins is ready.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to follow up on MP Arnold's question, which is, I'm curious, when the lower end was 85 or 88 kilotons and the upper end by science was 312, why the minister's press release didn't say it will be at least 85 or 88 kilotons, as opposed to picking an arbitrary number of 25, which seems very arbitrary to me and totally unrelated to science. And I can guarantee you in Nova Scotia, because I know the plants are ready to go to process the fish, so that's not a barrier. So there seems to be a massive disconnect between this minimum of 25, and it feels like it's going to be pulling teeth to get fisheries to go above that, when the science is saying do something much larger.
Quick answer, please.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I can speak to that question. So basically, the amounts that science has derived is the potential removals in total for those three cohorts that we saw appearing. So it's not an annual TAC recommendation. and it's the maximum amount.
It's not what it says.
It's the maximum amount that could be removed from that biomass so that the stock still remains in the healthy zone. And one of the factors that explain the 2N members is the different assumption that we're making on natural mortalities.
The DFO presentation says.
Thank you, Mr. Perkins. We'll now go to Mr. Cormier for 5 minutes or less, please. Or Mr. Morrissey.
Thank you, Chair. Question, Mr. Burns. It's no surprise that red fishery would be considered or reopening this year. It's been a discussion point for a couple of years that the red fish stocks were recovered to the point that a fishery would be open. Am I correct in that?
That's correct. We've been working with the industry for a number of years.
So it's nobody's surprised here. Everybody was getting ready. I was getting lobbied for it. So the industry was prepared, certainly for the processing side. I want to go back to, I believe you had raised in an earlier answer, the shrimp started to decline in the mid, and I lost the number. When did the shrimp stocks start to, when did your concern level start as it related to the shrimp fishery?
So the shrimp stocks start declining in the mid 2000.
So I thought you said what mid 2000? Give me a clear. Is it mid 2002?
I don't have the graph, but 2015 and the that's before the sorry, it's the mid 2000. So before years before that, we start to see the 3 cohorts of redfish appearing. So even at the time where the biomass of redfish was critically low, we had started to see decrease of the biomass for our indices for the biomass of shrimp in the Gulf, which speaks to the broader environmental factor, like not just the predation from redfish as a contributing factor to their decline.
Okay, so successive ministries were aware that there was some issues surrounding. I'm referencing the shrimp.
Yes, and actually an example of the application of the ecosystem approach that we've alluded to earlier is with the changing condition in the Gulf, there was a realization that our framework to assess was not valid. So we have reviewed the assessment framework to specifically take into account those environmental changes.
Okay, Mr. Cormier.
Je me rappelle que ça fait depuis 2015 que je suis député. Ça fait
I remember that I've been an MP since 2015, and since 2015 we've been speaking about the redfish in the Gulf. And at the time, I was working with MPO in a number. I heard about the MPO and DFO rather in a number of news. And then we recently heard a minister come that when it comes to reestablishing fish stocks and the work done by DFO leaves much to be desired. So herring in the spring was closed. Shrimp, no doubt, will close. Cod was closed. So what is your plan to reestablish these species? In 2019, the Fisheries Act was amended in order to implement measures to ensure that fish species in the critical zone will be properly managed, that decisions be sustainable. And given these amendments, we now have a regulatory obligation to put in place plans to protect the stocks identified in the regulation. I think by the 4th of April this year, in the coming weeks then, we will know what these plans will. We will have these reestablishment plans that are very sound for a number of fish stocks that find themselves in the critical zone. What about shrimp? So when do you expect that shrimp will come back in sufficient numbers in the coming years? Would you have an estimate? Is it 1 year, 3 years, 10 years, 20 years? Thank you for your question, Mr. Chair. In the case of the Gulf shrimp, given that the dominant factor here is climate change. And what about redfish? Yes, we don't expect that they will come back to levels that we saw in the 1990s. Well, all the more reason to believe that we need a plan. And whether there's be herring and mackerel, for example, those are having troubles. It is the coastal communities that are suffering, and I hope that you will put the shoulder to the wheel to ensure that something happens. That's what we're looking for, and I'll give the rest of my time to Mr. Carlett.
It's hardly well taken, is it? So I guess that concludes our 2 hours of committee business with our witnesses. I want to again thank Mr. Adam Burns and his staff for coming once again today and actually staying for the full 2 hours to answer questions and participate in our study that we're taking place on the redfish. So again, we'll suspend for a couple of moments now to switch out to just ourselves. Yeah, we got some committee business. Can I do mine first? Okay, so we have some budgets to approve, and I know we did instruct the clerk to prepare a budget for the Yukon travel and submit it once again. We are past the deadline for submitting it, but they are prepared to let us submit it and include it in their deliberations with the liaison committee. And I believe that's for a budget of $206,000, $612.40. Yeah, it's expensive, yes. So I'm asking for permission to submit that to the liaison or wherever it goes, committee or sub-liaison or, okay, agreed. We'll submit it and see where it goes this time. There's a budget as well that was done up for the Elver study. Is it the will of the committee to adopt the budget in the amount of $1,500? Agreed. All right. Then there's the adoption of the redfish quota study budget, which is up to an amount of $6,000. Everybody in agreement with that? Okay. Oh, yes. Too bad. At our next committee meeting, of course, we will finish our study on redfish quotas with witnesses from organizations. And the deadline to submit your witness list to the clerk for the derelict vessel study is Friday, March 15th at 5 p.m. Okay? The deadline to submit your witness list to the clerk for the derelict vessel study put forward by Ms. Barron is Friday, March 15th at 5 p.m. Mr. Perkins.
Ask a question, maybe propose, I know there's no such thing as a friendly amendment, but can we make the derelict vessel study include Atlantic Canada as well?
With what?
Atlantic Canada, because it's only British Columbia. Or the
Don't have a
British
problem.
Columbia in the north. I
Ask
think.
Ms. Barron, she's the one who moved the motion, if she's okay with adding it. Ms. Barron.
Thank you, Chair. And I appreciate bringing this forward because clearly there are derelict vessels along all coasts, including the Arctic as well, and absolutely on the East Coast. The reason why I had it narrowed down to just the West Coast is because we had agreement to allocate only 4 meetings, which would never be able to entail all the information that we need to cover the East Coast and the Arctic. And so I would be more than happy to accept an amendment by one of my colleagues to add 2 meetings to the study to include the Arctic and the East Coast.
I'm
If
seeing
that's
the nodding
the
of
will of
heads
the
to
committee.
add the extra 2 meetings if we can for the derelict vessel study to include the Arctic and the East Coast as well. Okay? So we might have to change the budget amount as we go, and I'll come back to you with that. I said the next meeting is that, and we have Mr. Arnold.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I hope this will only take just a couple of minutes as well. I'd like to move the motion that was put on notice that the committee invite the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans Canadian Coast Guard to appear for no fewer than 2 hours regarding the supplementary estimate C 2023-2024, and that this meeting take place as soon as possible, but no later than March 21st, 2024, as that is the deadline for reporting it to the House.
For tabling them. Yeah. Okay, we've heard the motion. Any discussion? All those in favor? Contraminded? Motion's carried.
Thank you. I'd also like to propose that because the drafting instructions for the IUU study seem to be keep getting kicked down the road, that if everyone is in agreement that we have them submitted electronically to the clerk by Friday, March 1st. That's this Friday at 5 p.m.
Tight. I'll leave it up to members.
We've had weeks to prepare for this, so it shouldn't be a short, but that's why I wanted to make sure it was presented today.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not opposed to the idea. I just wanted to see if I can get some clarification through you to the clerk around process. Do we need to have oral drafting instructions in a meeting? Is that part of our standard process, or if somebody can answer that and clarify for me,
I'll ask
please.
Mr. Arnold to explain what will be done this way. Yeah, I think it's the recommendations. Yes.
Please explain. I'm not asking for clarification around the content of the motion. I'm asking clarification from somebody, either the analysts or the clerk, who are process experts around whether it is a requirement that we have oral drafting instructions in a meeting or whether this is an appropriate process to move forward with. So it's more so around the
Okay.
the
I think
process.
that's a decision of the committee. If the committee agrees to accept written submissions,
So
it'll
with
avoid chewing up another meeting to do
Yes.
it. Right?
So with respect, Chair, I just, I'm wondering if I can get clarification about that from the clerk or the analysts.
Okay. I'll
Thank
ask
you.
the analysts if they want, or the clerk.
There's nothing in the standing orders that prevent us, for doing it by email.
Mr. Cormier.
Just to make sure, we want to do what by email?
Submit drafting instructions for the IUU report so that the analysts will have them to work on while we're not here for 2 weeks.
Isn't it something that we usually do, like in camera, and like?
Well, we usually do it in committee business.
In committee business, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But It's up to the committee.
Can we come back to the next meeting with that, just that we can think about it, or do we have to?
Yeah, it can be dealt with on Thursday.
Mhm.
I won't be here on Thursday, and Mr. Arnold will have the chair. I have my medical procedure on Friday, so I'm going home tomorrow morning. Mr. Arnold.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We should have all been prepared for this. It was on the notice of meeting for the February 8th meeting that we were to provide drafting instructions. So we're not cutting anybody's time short to prepare for this, I don't believe. Just trying to get some process underway so that the analysts can start working on a draft and hopefully have a draft back to us in a reasonable amount of time when we do return here.
Mr. Morrissey.
It was on the agenda, but we didn't get to it. In fact, we're over now. So we didn't have that fulsome discussion on drafting instructions. This is a very important study that covered a lot of serious material. And I, for one, want a full discussion. I want to hear from my colleagues on the points that that are important to them, that has to be covered in this study, that should be highlighted. So, yes, it was on the agenda, but we're at 5 minutes. We're now in overtime.
Mr. Arnold.
I then asked that the chair set aside time on for Thursday's meeting to ensure that we get to the drafting instructions on the IUU report before we go into a 2-week break, with only 1 week when we return, and then another following 2-week break.
Mr.
Okay, but how much time do you think we need carved off?
5 minutes.
We need 15 to 20.
15 to 20 minutes?
15 to
Okay.
20.
We'll make 15 to 20 minutes available
Yeah.
Thursday's meeting.
on Thursday's meeting.
Maximum.
Maximum, yes, maximum 20 minutes. Yeah.
You mean to talk about?
Okay? And that gives people time to get their thoughts together between now and then and have it prepared and good to go. All right? Okay. I want to say thank you to the clerk and to our analysts again today and to the translators. And I want to recognize somebody that's here every week with me is my staff person, Liam O'Brien, who just got accepted to do his PhD at Carleton. Nah. He owes me too much now. Yeah. And he's got 2 masters done from 2 different universities. So, meeting adjourned.
Je voudrais simplement, Monsieur le Président, m'assurer qu'on ne déborde
Mr.
pas.
Chair, I just want to make sure that we won't interfere in the time allocated to witnesses next week. That is the time allocated to discuss it. I want to make sure that we will not be limiting the time of our witnesses who will be appearing before the committee. As we did today.
We would have to add time to do that. Like today, it was possible for us to add, almost half an hour.
Okay.
Thursday, I mean, we'll be able to look at that Thursday and what's on the agenda.
Okay.
And if we can add time, we will. That'll be Mr. Arnold's decision in the chair.
D'accord. Je vous surveille,
yeah,
Monsieur Reynolds.
Yeah.
I have my eyes on you.
Done. Thank you, everyone.